Then I started to notice in the yard out in front of me what I thought were children. And I remember thinking, what are these kids doing in my mom's yard? There were 6 of them, and they all lined up, and they all just kind of glided down across the yard in front of me. I mean, they weren't like walking. It was almost like they were on a little train.
Keep watching to learn more.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is the life of a UFO contactee. My guest is Debra Jordan Kauble, who was the central figure in Bud Hopkins' classic book Intruders, The Incredible Visitations at Kauble Woods, as well as its 1992 TV miniseries adaptation Intruders, using the pseudonym Kathy Davis to protect her family. She is author of Extraordinary Contact, Life Beyond Intruders. Debra lives in Kokomo, Indiana, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Debra. It is a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I appreciate the invitation, and it's been fun getting to know you.
Thank you. And I know we have a mutual friend, Bruce Solheim, who has been interviewed on this channel many times. And I imagine there will be many more. But it's interesting. Since you know Bruce so well, let's talk about that for a moment. I believe you are part of Yvonne Smith's group of contactees, and your experience goes back to the 1980s and even earlier, so you have a long history in this field. Let's start with the contactee group that you participated in along with Bruce Solheim and Yvonne.
Well, I met Yvonne very early on in my experience in ufology after Intruders was published. And she was so kind to me. She was welcoming and friendly, and I felt so comfortable around her, and I felt, I just felt secure. So back in the 80s and 90s, I still live in Indiana, and I lived in Indiana then as well, and I didn't have anybody to talk to about this sort of stuff. Who was like me in mass, like the group Zero now. I mean, we could talk about it in my family because there were other people in my family who'd had weird experiences, and also my friends, but still was, you could only talk about the same thing so many times. So I almost felt kind of like I was out adrift in the middle of the ocean by myself, in the middle of the country, This was before the internet, before cell phones, and I met Yvonne, and she quickly and warmly accepted me into the group, even though I didn't live in California, because that's where they were at the time, and, well, they still are. But Zero has expanded out to, it's like a worldwide network of experiencers now that all come together. They still have their monthly physical meetings, but now Yvonne does the out-of-towners Zoom meetings that I participate in. I'm just so thankful to be a part of the group. I've been out to California a couple times to speak with the group, to speak for them and tell them my story. And everybody there is so kind. And I mean, it's just very helpful and wonderful thing. And I get to meet wonderful people like Bruce and Jim Lowe and Lucy Morale and a lot of other people there that have just really, they're like family to me at this point.
Well, let's talk about the name CERO. It's CERO. What does that stand for?
I wrote that down because, Close Encounters Research Organization. And I think the reason I wrote it down is because I think originally it was something slightly different, and I think that's what it is now. And, Yvonne does regression sessions for anybody who feels the need. And I think she can even, not only does she do it now, person on person, but I think she can also do it remotely now, which is really nice for someone if you want to do it that way, and you don't have a regression or hypnotherapist in your area. So, and then, like I said, the best part of CERO for me is the support group meetings. And I just love it. I try not to miss them. They're once a month, and they are priceless.
Now, Yvonne Smith wrote the introduction to the new edition of your book, and she was introduced to you through Bud Hopkins, who obviously featured you in his book, Intruders, the Copley Woods Visitation. So Yvonne had already been working with Bud prior to your even meeting him.
Yeah, I think so. They knew each other, and they're both working with abductees.
So you've had this long-standing effort to integrate and understand and come to terms with what turns out to be not just an abduction experience, but a lifelong pattern that affected not only yourself, but other members of your family, I gather, going back to your childhood.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
I probably, most of our viewers will be unfamiliar with the story in Intruders since it's been decades since that book was a bestseller. So let's go back to that day in 1983 when things became, I suppose the best word is all too obvious.
Yeah, things got weird in 1983, weirder. I was a single mom at that point. I was 24 years old. I had a couple little boys, like 3 and 4. And I had recently moved back home with my parents after getting divorced. Thank God for them. And at that time in my life. But anyway, it was June 30th, 1983, that night. It was that evening after dinner. I was preparing to go cut out some patterns with a friend of mine who lived one street over from my parents' house. She was a seamstress and I couldn't sew, but I could cut straight lines. So she would, give me a couple bucks of spending money to help out my parents for letting us stay there in exchange for my work. And then we got to hang out. So that was fun because we're friends. But, as I stood at the kitchen window, washing my hands, getting ready to leave, I noticed a funny light coming out of the pump house of the swimming pool. Because Mom and Dad had a big swimming pool back in the back behind the house, and it had a big sandstone pump house. Fancy. It was a big sandstone tri-level, the house itself. And the pump house matched the house. But anyway, I noticed that light was on, and at the time, I didn't really connect why it struck me odd, but in retrospect, I believe that the light was not the same color that it should have been. It was a brighter light rather than a light bulb kind of light. Anyway, I mentioned it to my mom. I said, hey, the pump house door is open and the light's on. You want me to get it before I leave? And she's like, no, don't worry about it. Your dad can do it when he gets home. I'm like, okay. So a couple of minutes later, I go to the front of the house and get ready to leave. And I thought to myself at the very last minute, I think I'll go down the side drive to the turnaround just to make sure everything looks okay. Not thinking of aliens by any means, But my dad had a large workshop behind the swimming pool, back at the back part of the lot, with a lot of money in stuff back there. And I was about to leave my mom home alone with my 2 little boys, as my dad worked second shift at the local factory. So I thought I'd have one more look before I left. So I did. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, except I did notice that the pedestrian door to the garage that was attached to the house was now open. And I knew that was closed before, because I closed it when I put my dog in there. But instead of stopping, I just went ahead and went right on over to Deanna's house, which took like a minute and a half. And I called Mom just to let her know what I'd seen. And she didn't seem concerned about it. She's like, "Don't worry about it. Your dad can get it when he gets home." I said, "Okie dokie." So I hung up the phone, and immediately after I hung up, she called back. And she said, as soon as she heard my voice, "I need you to come home right now." And I was like, kind of, shocked, because I'm not used to hearing my mom have anxiety in her voice over anything. And I said, "Why? What's wrong?" And my friend's husband heard me, and I sure detected the concern in my voice, and he says over my shoulder, "Tell her to call the police. That's what we pay him for." And she heard him, and she said, "No, I don't want anybody here but you." And I thought, okay, that's a little strange, but all right, I'll be there in a minute. Told my friends I'll be back. Got to go check out some things. So I got back home quickly, and I pulled back up on that side drive instead of down in the front of the house. Got out, and I went into the little patio room Daddy had built on the side of the house. And I went in there. Mom was in there, and I grabbed a shotgun that my dad kept stowed behind the trash compactor. And my mom says to me right away, "That's not loaded." And I said, "Yes, I know, but whoever's out there doesn't." So I went out on foot, walked around, looked around the swimming pool. I went back again to the shop just to double check to make sure everything was secure. There weren't any open doors or anything back there. Everything looked good. Found my dog under Dad's ladder truck back there, who was supposed to be in the garage where the door was open. But she would not come out, so I left her and went on back across the back of the house, the backyard, to the garage that was attached to the house, and through that open door. Flipped on the light switch and started looking around and didn't see anybody in there. And just about the time I was ready to leave, I suddenly felt this wave of anxiety hit me like a ton of bricks, and I felt like I was on fire, like my whole body started to feel on fire. And I thought to myself, I remember thinking, "Oh my God, I got to get out of here right now." And I headed to the doorway. And when I got to the open doorway, something hit me, like in the chest area. It was like a bright white electric fist. Bam! They hit me right there. The light was so white and intense that I could not see anything but the light. And I'm quite sure that the light was so intense and so bright that I know my eyes had to be closed. Anybody's eyes would be closed, but I could still see it. And I could feel it start to slowly spread across my chest and across my arms, down my legs, up my spine, around my head. And it was this shaking sensation. Then the shaking became more and more intense until it felt almost like a vibration that like permeated every cell of my body. I have absolutely no idea how long I was in this condition. I don't know how long I stood there. I don't know how I survived it, because I remember one thought in my head: "Oh, I'm dead." And so all of a sudden, the light intensity dropped off greatly, and the vibrating and turned into shaking and turned into finally, I was no longer like in that state. But I also realized that I was also no longer standing in the open doorway. At this point now, I am outside on the cement patio in front of the open doorway, maybe 10 feet or so. And I don't remember walking there. I don't know how I got there. I do remember hearing a disembodied voice. I didn't see anybody, but I heard somebody say it was unfortunate that I felt pain. And I also felt some sensation of someone touching my shoulder on the right side, pulling down on me almost. And then I remember this burning sensation in my right ear that was excruciating, but I couldn't scream, I couldn't move, I couldn't get away from it. Then I started to notice in the yard out in front of me what I thought were children. And I remember thinking, what are these kids doing in my mom's yard? There were 6 of them, and they were like moving around from all different points in the yard, and they all converged up at the edge of where the driveway meets with the swimming pool gate, up and, to my right and up in the yard. And they all lined up, and they all just kind of glided down across the yard in front of me. I mean, they weren't like walking. It was almost like they were on a little train. And I couldn't see a lot of detail because my eyes were splotched up really bad, white blotches in my vision. Plus, it was dark out at this point. And I thought, oh my God, my children. Because I thought my kids are in the house here with my mom, and what is happening? This is crazy, and my kids are in danger or whatever. And the voice came back and said, your children are fine. And it was at that point I noticed this thing to my left, which was stunning. And once I saw this thing on my left, I completely forgot about these kids or where they were going. And in fact, I never saw them again. I don't recall seeing them again after that. I don't recall seeing them go in this thing. I don't know where they went, because all I could see was this thing. And I didn't want to look at it because it terrified me. But I didn't not want to look at it because I needed to know where it was and if it was coming closer to me, that kind of thing. And again, I can't run away from this thing. I'm trapped. I can't move. Only thing I can move are my eyes. And I see this thing. It's egg-shaped. It's egg-shaped. It's not much bigger than that pump house swimming pool. Now, I'm not the greatest person for estimating sizes, but I'm going to say it was maybe 10 or a little more feet tall. At the tip, it was like an egg sitting on its big bottom with the point up. And around the bottom area, maybe 8 or 9 feet in diameter, and then a little bigger around the middle. And I noticed some things coming off of it, which I called legs, but they were very skinny. And, I don't think they could support the weight of anything, but they were there. I don't know what they were for. And at one point, I almost thought I could see this thing wobble a little bit, as if it were not completely solidly flat on the ground, but I wasn't sure whether that was it or my eyes, because my eyes were starting to really be jacked up. I did see a couple of white openings, and one of them turned into like a ball of white light about the size of a basketball. That it was away from this thing maybe 5 or 10 feet. And it was out in front of me out in the yard. And this went down really slowly, and then it went right back up slowly and stopped where it had started. And I got the distinct impression that it was looking at me. I felt like it was looking at me. But then I heard another voice, and this voice was different than the other ones. And when I heard this voice, it was like someone snapped their fingers and I woke up from this nightmare. And I could suddenly move. I forgot everything that I had just seen. And that memory wouldn't start to drizzle back for 48 hours or so and really hit me when I saw the mark in the yard. But then the sound was my voice. It was my mom's voice calling my name. So I immediately turned and walked towards that voice. And my mom, she had the kitchen door open, kind of had her head sticking out of it a little bit, and she was saying, "Hey, is everything okay?" I don't know where she had been previous to that, but I said, "Yeah, everything's cool." And I didn't, at that point, I knew I was not going back to cutout patterns because I felt weird. I felt disoriented and creepy, and I felt like I wanted to get wet. I don't know why, I just felt really gross. And so I got a hold of my friend, and they agreed to come over to the house and swim instead of cut patterns because time had run out. At that point, I didn't realize how long I'd been gone, but later Bud, through the interview with them and Mom, determined that whole thing I just described to you was actually maybe an hour and 15 minutes. I had no idea of how long this went on and what else happened that I didn't remember for years and still don't. But so anyway, my friend came with her daughter, teenager, and we decided to walk back through the backyard to the swimming pool and get in the pool and a nice little dip before bedtime. And as we're walking across the yard, her daughter starts to jump, and she thinks that she's maybe stepped on a bee or something. Her foot stung, and then it started to feel tingly and numb, but then the numbness started kind of going up her leg into her ankle and her shin. So we got out to the pool, and we looked her foot over real well, and we didn't see any bee stingers or anything like that. And it was her mom's feeling that, hey, if you did get stung by something, the cold chlorinated water would feel good on it. Just stick your foot in there. Let's get in for a minute. So we did. But while we were there, all of us started feeling nauseous and queasy. And my eyes started hurting really bad and started getting a headache. And I started noticing halos around all of the lights outside it was annoying and it was hurting my eyes. And so we gave up. Eventually, they went home, and I went in the house and went to bed. The next morning when I woke up, my eyes were swollen shut. They were so bad, and I was in so much pain that my mom took me to the emergency room. And I know now that this is highly unlikely, but there was actually an ophthalmologist in the emergency room when Mom took me in there. He might have just been passing through or something, but I don't think that's a normal thing. Anyway, they had him look at me, and he says to my mother, "Can you take her across the street to my office? I have all my equipment over there. I can give her a better examination over there, and I'll have my girls work her in. Here it is." And Mom's like, "Yeah, sure." And I said, "Yeah, that's fine." Because, I was an adult, but I was living with my parents, and I was actually into their insurance now at that point. So she's calling the shots. So anyway, get over there, and he gives me a really good examination. And one of the first things that he asks me is, "Have you looked into the arc of a welder's torch? Have you looked into the sun? Have you been anywhere where there's been an eclipse?" Or something to that effect. And I said, "No." And keep in mind, I did not remember the bright flash of light or any of that. At this point, I knew something happened, but I didn't have specifics. And so I didn't say anything to him. What would I say, and what would he do about it, So I didn't remember enough to tell him anything. And he was surprised that my eyes weren't bothering me for days prior to that because they were so bad. And I was prescribed gel and drops, and I'm maybe even an oral medication, but I can't remember for sure. It just seemed that it was a lot. And it took forever for my eyes to recover. And they never were right after that. Let me quickly stick in here so I don't forget. I went way farsighted after that and developed astigmatism in my right eye. I didn't wear glasses or anything prior to this. And then in my 30s, I was diagnosed with cataracts and macular degeneration. And by the time I barely reached 50, I might have not even been at quite 50 yet. I had to have both lenses replaced. And, even to this day, ever since then, I get every 6 months the big dilation in the photographs and all that stuff on my eyes have been that way. So far, my macular degeneration remains dry and stable, thank God. But my vision is slowly getting worse. Anyway, So back to the story then. I will always blame my eye problems on all that night. I always will, but I can't prove it. But it is what it is. Anyhow, I go home. I'm having, at this point, kind of what I termed a nervous breakdown because I can't sleep at night. I keep feeling like something's going to come back and it's going to get my kids or me. So I start sitting in the kids' room between their twin beds at night. And then as soon as the sun comes up and everybody else in the house gets up, then I fall asleep because I'm exhausted at that point. And I can't go to the bathroom in the upstairs bathroom with the window in that bathroom because that window makes me vulnerable. And later I realized that window is right over the mark in the yard. I don't even consciously think I realized it at the point where I started to feel weird about it. And for a year after this, I was all kinds of crazy. Thank God for my parents. But it was a few days later, all the family had come over for 4th of July holiday weekend celebration because we had the big yard and the swimming pool, And one of the kids comes running in and says, "Grandma, what's wrong with your yard?" And my mom looks at him, and I remember her saying, "I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean, what's wrong with my yard?" And he said, "Come and look." So we all ran out there to look. And big as life, right there is a big, 8-foot circle with a streak coming off it that goes all across the yard, ends all the way up where the driveway meets the fence gate. That streak's about 2 feet wide and then ends in a perfect arc. And then the circle is about 8 feet in diameter. And there's 2 places where the dirt looks shoved up, crunched up, out through the grass, and there are 2 big cracks in it. And my mom giggles and she says, "Oh, that's where our UFO landed the other night." And the kids kind of giggled. And I looked at my mom and I thought to myself, why would you say that? I didn't think it was funny at all, and I didn't understand why she was giggling. And then, I think maybe it was like nervous giggle. And I looked back at the mark in the yard, and as soon as I took a second look at it, it just slapped me in the face. Everything started coming back, all the memories of that night, even memories of things prior to that night. I could see 2 big black eyes looking right back at me over this mark in the yard. And it was just, my brain just went poof. That was it. Just poof. I'm done. The grass in that mark and in that streak were laid down and this weird kind of beige gray color, and the soil under it was rock hard. Later, I did my experiment with it where I took a piece of it and then a piece of regular dirt, put them in cups of water, let them sit overnight, and the next day in the regular soil I had mud, obviously. But the rock I got from the mark was still a rock. It never would take any of the water. And we discovered a few months, after in that first winter that came, snow melted off of it. We'd get a little drip start of the snow would come down, you get a half an inch or inch of snow, and all of a sudden you look out and there's that mark, all the snow was gone off of it. It's just the weirdest thing ever. And plants, the dandelions that grew near it were doubles the size of the ones out in the yard further. Tomato plant Mom had out by the driveway where that point ended. The vines were as big around as my wrists, and tomatoes looked like grapefruits, but they were very acidic and not edible. And then the behind where the mark was, there was a swath of woods, and it that separated our house from the house next door to us. Just no, you could see the house. It wasn't that dense, but it was a wooded lot. In that fall, an area of maybe 5-8 feet wide, right directly behind where the mark was, from the ground all the way up to the treetops, those leaves turned yellow and fell off. long before any of the rest of the trees in the rest of the parts of that little wood area did. Dad had a ham radio tower over there near where the mark was, and the coax cable that ran from the tower into the house, the metal inside the coax cable all melted together. And then it wasn't too long after that incident happened that the transformer that was over by the pump house, above the pump house of the swimming pool, exploded. And just all kinds of strange stuff started happening, But anyway, like I said, memories of what happened that night had started coming back. I was having a nervous breakdown, just riddled with anxiety and having a lot of physical problems. I started getting swollen glands and intermittent low-grade temperatures that would come and go, and I'd break out in a rash, or get nausea or stomach issues. My heartbeat, I'd get real bad, irregular heartbeats. My anxiety level, I would have panic attacks, the likes of which I'd never had before. If I had some anxiety previous to this, it was totally jacked through the roof after this. I was no stranger to UFO stuff or paranormal stuff. My mom was an interesting person. Dad was an interesting person. I was aware of the Betty and Barney Hill story. I just thought it was a cool story. And, nothing about it really scared me much. I remember when Dad took us to see Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977 on Christmas Day, or Christmas Eve. And I remember poking him and hitting him like, that's what they look like. That's what they look like, Dad. And he's like, shut up, or you're going to sit in the car. I want to see the movie. So, but I was real excited when I saw that because it was like, oh my God, I know that. But I wasn't terrified like I became after June 30th, 1983.
You've described a horrific experience. You talk about how you were having panic attacks and anxiety and a nervous breakdown. Your eyes developed macular degeneration. It sounded absolutely horrible, but I think it's important at this point to let our viewers know that in retrospect, you feel that all of these things were for your own benefit.
Well, yes. I was 24 then, and I'm 66 now. And I've had a long time to process it and see how things have unfolded for me and in my life. And what comes to mind is when I took my kids to get their shots, and the doctor, my kids were terrified and they didn't want to get shots, and the typical thing. But the doctor was like, this is going to help you in the long run. It's going to keep you from getting the measles and chickenpox and all of this other stuff. You know what I mean? It was for your own good later. And I felt like that was sort of what this was all about because of this experience that I had and other experiences I had. It changed me in such a way that I don't think I could have changed into the person I am now without it. And sometimes I say on that night Debbie died, but Debbie 2.0 was born, and the birth was a not an easy one as a lot of births are, but it was definitely one worth it. I've asked now if I could go back in time and not have any of this weird stuff happen, or especially June 30, 83, would I make it all go away? And while I'm definitely not a fan of the fear and the trauma that I went through, I understand that in some way it was necessary for me to achieve what I've achieved by having that experience. So I wouldn't change it.
Since we've had a previous conversation, the way you explained it to me is that you've had amazingly horrible things happen to you in your lifetime. You had a tornado come and literally destroy your house while you were hiding in a closet inside, and you emerged unscathed or with a few scratches after your home had been destroyed. You had another occasion in which your husband, right in front of you, took a gun and took his own life while you were watching. These are the kinds of things that most people could hardly imagine what it's like. But you were able to survive these horrible circumstances, and perhaps this earlier experience was part of the preparation that was necessary.
Well, I've had this conversation with my therapist, and trust me, I have had good therapists in my life. Thank God for them. And I've been open with them about my weird experiences, especially the new one. Well, she's not new now, but she made the comment one time when we were discussing all of it. I'm like, I was diagnosed with PTSD by the doctors at the hospital Bud took me to. And this was before any of that other stuff happened to me. And one of the things Bud and the doctors noted was, PTSD back then wasn't talked about like it is now. And it wasn't known widely like it is now. We're talking about in the late 80s, early 90s. And in order to have these kind of dramatic symptoms, you have to have a really traumatic event that triggers this. And there hadn't been nothing in my life that would be so traumatic as to trigger this, other than the June 30, 83 incident, for sure, and maybe one or two other ones. And obviously, that's also become part of my diagnosis with the suicide and the tornado. And it's something I still work on to this day with EMDR therapy, which, FYI, is amazing and life-changing. But she mentioned that to me. She's like, I wonder if, she goes, when I first met you, when I read your record and I saw what you had been through, the tornado, the suicide, she goes, those are things that some people, just one of those things, some people can't ever come back from. And you not only have come back from it, but you seem to have thrived through it. I never got over it. I got through it. I learned how to get through it. And I said, now 32 years after the suicide, I can look back on it and say, it was a gift to me that I was there in his final hour of need, because it showed me who I really was, and that I had never given myself enough credit for how strong of a person I could be. And I told you, I felt like my little bitty self was a little nugget in a pocket of a slingshot, and whoever was holding the slingshot and driving the bus, I felt like the farther down they could pull me, when they finally let go of it, the higher up I was able to go. How high I went up was my choice. One thing I never did was think of myself as a victim, even when I was. My late husband had planned to take me out with him, but he changed his mind at the last second. And everything I've been through, I never let myself feel like I was a victim. I always thought of myself as a survivor, not a victim. And I think my mindset came from having to survive through the weird stuff. I was a single mom with 2 little boys, and I had to figure out a way to not go crazy so that I would lose my kids or not be able to be the mother I always wanted to be and raise them right. I had to keep my feet on the ground. I had to figure out a way. When I reached out to Bud Hopkins, I had already tried to rationalize away all the stuff that I had experienced and seen. Even the mark in the yard. I called Purdue agricultural agent to ask him what would cause this. I had my dad and uncle working on other things to figure out why this would have happened. Why would I remembered what I remembered? And I could find a dozen people who could tell me what it wasn't, but I couldn't find anyone to tell me what it could be. And I needed to know what I was dealing with, because I can't work on fixing something if I don't know what it is I'm working on. You know what I mean? I got to have a starting point somewhere. I had picked up Missing Time in the library months before June 30, 83. That was the book that Bud wrote. I never could finish that book because I would have like anxiety attacks, and I wasn't connecting the dots as to between my anxiety, why was I feeling like this, and trying to read this book. But I did note that there was a place in the back where I could write to the author if I thought I'd had this experience or knew someone who did. Well, I thought my sister probably did because she had the 1965 experience that she always talked about, which I just always grew up hearing and assumed that, it was true. She wouldn't lie, and other people must have this too, So one of the things I did after I saw the mark in the yard and started having all these crazy memories and thoughts and everything just bombarding me, I went back to the library and got that book. And I got the address out of it. And I wrote him this gigantic letter. Just told him all kinds of stuff. Mostly started out with Kathy's stuff. But eventually I'm like, oh, and by the way, this happened a few weeks ago. And took a bunch of Polaroids of the mark in the yard and was telling him how I felt and everything. I had never done that before. I'd never written anybody who wrote a book. I never felt compelled to. That's how desperate I was. And I told him, I just want someone to help me figure this out so I can make it fit in my life. Because I got 2 kids that depend on me. And I can't go crazy. I can't afford to go crazy. They need me. Help me make this fit in my life, He did. I mean, he I don't know. I know it was a few weeks before my mom even mailed the letter because she said she's feeling kind of weird about it some kind of way. But she said something kind of made her put it in the mailbox that day. But it was shortly after that he called. And that was the beginning of the investigation that took like 2.5 years, And then at the very end, he's like, this is an important case. I found independent witnesses to that night. You have this physical stuff. You've had other things happen that you remember now that align with things that he knew from other people that I had no knowledge of at the time, and he said, I really would like to write a book about this because I think the world should hear about this case. This is an important case. It has all these different facets to it that you don't typically see. And my family and I were like, that's okay. We'll pass. That was not the point of me reaching out to you. I just wanted my life to be normal. I just wanted to be able to give my kids a normal life. But he convinced us, obviously, that, it would be a tremendous help to people in the future. And there were millions of people out there just like us. So, and then Intruders, that's when Intruders happened. And like I said before, I would not change anything about what happened in my life that led up to that point because meeting Bud, I remember hearing Dr. Phil one time saying there are 7 pivotal points in your life and your life changes. One of those might be for me meeting Bud, because if I had not met him, there is absolutely nothing in my life that would be even remotely recognizable. To the point where I may not have even been here to be through the tornado or have been with my late husband for him to have been there when he did what he did. Everything happened the way it was supposed to. And that includes meeting Bud and all the other stuff that's happened to me.
Let's talk about what the neighbors observed.
Yeah, there were 2 neighbors. When Bud came to Indiana for the first time, much to my mom's horror when he told her, I'm going to be going around knocking on the neighbors' doors. And my mom was like, oh my God, the neighbors are going to think we're crazy. But he did it. And he actually found 2 neighbors that had something to tell him. One was the lady and husband that lived remember I told you there was a little strip of wooded area just to the north of our house, and it separated another house. Well, that gal in that other house spoke to Bud. And we weren't really like, it's a big neighborhood, big houses far apart. We didn't really, hang out neighborly. Indianapolis is not a small city, but they were nice. And she told Bud that she saw, I think it was like a red flash come from the backyard and that her television set turned red, or a bright flash and her TV set turned red. I can't remember how it went. But she was terrified. Her power went out, and her husband, I believe, told Bud that when he got home from work, he found her hiding behind a couch, and she was terrified that someone was coming to get her. Now, this gal eventually appeared on a television show. She came to support me and say what she remembered on some TV show that I went to do with Bud after the book came out. And so that was amazing. And then the other gal lived across the road from us in the house directly across from us. This woman was a shift nurse at the hospital, actually, where my mom took me to the emergency room. She was still in bed at the time, but about to get up and get ready to go to work. She worked third shift. And she said she was awakened before her alarm because her whole house was shaking and the sound was so loud. She said it sounded to her like she thought a jet was about to crash into her house. And her power acted weird and went out. And in one part of the house, the clocks in the front part of the house stopped, her little digital clocks, which that's the closest. The front of her house is the closest to our house in our yard. And it scared her, and she didn't know what to think. We didn't even talk to these folks before Bud came, so we had no idea that they knew that anything, that they knew anything. I think even one of the neighbors, like 2 or 3 houses down to the south of us, when he talked to them, I think they even said it wasn't that night, but they had seen a weird light above that house on multiple occasions. And this was before June 30th, 83. And even before we moved there, they remembered seeing weird things happening over this house. So go figure that. I don't know. And then, one more, like 20 years later, Bud, after Intruders was published, Bud got a letter from a woman who, as it turned out, she lived on Hunter Road, the right behind us. The next road over, directly behind our house, and our houses were separated by long lots, as you noted, and there was a big wooded area, but sparse, not real dense, between our 2 houses, enough that we couldn't see her house, and she couldn't see ours. But she said she couldn't pinpoint the exact date, but it was around the same time frame. Her boys used to like to sleep out in the garage with their buddies when they were teenagers in high school, or weekend sleepouts or whatever. And she said one night they came in screaming, freaked out, because they claimed they saw hundreds of basketball-sized balls of white light drifting through the wooded area between my house, my mom and dad's house, and their house. And it terrified these kids so badly that they would never sleep out in the garage again after that night. And she said they were legitimately afraid. She says, I have no doubt what they saw, that they saw what they said they saw, because they were legitimately terrified. And that was 20 years after Intruders was published. So, it wasn't just me.
Well, it seems as if there are 2 threads going through the story here. On the one hand, there's a pattern of alien contact, non-human contact, that has been in your family and goes back to your older sister and events that occurred, I don't know, before you were born, perhaps. And on the other hand, it seems as if there's also the possibility of the neighborhood itself being a locale where these kinds of events were known to take place. So those 2 threads seem to be coming together in your story.
It's definitely different. And it makes me wonder what, we didn't move there till I was 15. What prompted my dad to buy that house and move there? Because honestly, when we bought the house, it was it needed a lot of work. And my mom was not a happy camper when he did it. After the fact of my dad's hard work. After a few years, it was a wonderful home, and my dad could see it, mom couldn't. I don't know, but maybe there was some other factor involved as well with my dad getting us there. I don't know.
Let's talk about some of the responses that you have had when you went public with this story. I'm under the impression that, for example, it appeared as if the government was watching you.
Yeah, I don't know what that was all about. It wasn't a constant thing. And I really tried to avoid even thinking about it in that way because I didn't want to allow myself to get down in that rabbit hole and start being paranoid and, But there's no denying the fact I was kind of pursued by this guy through my friend. He worked where she worked, and she had introduced us. And he was really hot and heavy about wanting me to go out with him and stuff, and kind of handsy and whatnot. But I mean, I was a single mom at that point, and why not? I was young. Eventually, he invited me to go to a cabin that he had south of Indy in a beautiful little area. It wasn't too terribly far away from the armory down there. But I agreed to go for the week. I mean, we're adults, I agreed to go for the weekend and little weekend getaway, and he picked me up. And as soon as we got there, when we pulled in, it was dark, and I remember thinking, there's somebody outside your house, walking around your house. It's kind of weird. And he seemed a little alarmed by it. And I remember getting out of the car and looking over the hood of the car at him, and his face is like shocked. And the next thing I remember is I'm feeling drowsy and sick, and I'm kind of wake up and I feel like I'm going down. Like, that feeling when you're in an elevator and that sensation of going down and down. I don't know if I was in an elevator or I just was, dizzy or sick or whatever. But then when the doors opened, it was really white light, bright, like white tiles, glass with metal crisscrossed through it, little wires and flashing little lights with you could put cards and hands on these things. And now remember, we do that now, but this was back in the 90s, early 90s. I wasn't exposed to things like that. But I'm surrounded by these guys. They're just people. They're not aliens, in, I think, orange suits and there was a man in front of me with like a doctor's coat on, and they take me to this room, and the big doors swing open, like big double doors swing open, and the wall's all glass. And then I realized that this big room is actually a bunch of little rooms that are separated with glass partitions, and you can see other examine rooms, And this doctor, I will never forget his voice as long as I live. It was deep, and he had a southern drawl, and he was kind of smart alecky, and his face was kind of ruddy red, like his nose was a little bulbous. He had snow white hair, but he didn't look like ancient old. And he says, at one point he said something to me. They're like taking all kind of samples. Right? They're cutting my hair, cutting my nails, scraping my arms, scraping my tongue, all kinds of weird stuff. And he says to me, "Oh, you got a bug in your ear. I'm going to make you all better." And he pulls this thing out of my ear that hurts. And he showed it to me on the end of like a long, skinny tweezers. And then it's like, I can't remember, either legs popped out of it. It looked like a little tiny BB, then legs popped out or legs went back in it. And then he laughed. But I remember when he laughed, he said, "I don't even know why I'm bothering to tell you this, because you ain't going to remember none of it." And I said, "Oh, yes, I will. I'll never forget this." And bam, I'm out like a light. The next thing I remember, I'm waking up in this guy's cabin. And I look up, I'm on the couch, and I look up over the couch, and I see some little red lights going off. And I think, oh, it's probably his he was like a volunteer fireman or something down in this little area when he, and I thought, oh, that must be his police radio, and I fell back asleep, and then I woke up again. He's in the kitchen getting coffee and says, "Get your stuff. I'm taking you home." And I said, "But we just got here. Why?" And he said, and I didn't remember all that I just told you until that didn't start coming back till I got home. He said, "You got to go home. You got to go." And he seemed very agitated, very nervous. I'm like, "Fine." And I'm thinking to myself, well, good thing if I find this out now, if I get to liking you more. So he takes me home, and I swear to God, if he didn't have to pull in the driveway, he would have just shoved me out the door at a slow roll at the end of the driveway. I mean, that's like he went get out of my car. I got out of his car, and man, he was gone. Right? Boom. Didn't hear from him again for a long time. I went home, fell asleep, felt weird, woke up, started remembering all kinds of stuff. I remembered seeing his face. I remembered the hospital and the guys and the man. I remembered that. And I wrote it all down. I didn't hear from him for a long time, which was weird because he pursued me so crazily prior. And then my friend that I knew who he worked with her at the factory, she goes, so-and-so got transferred. They transferred him to a whole other plant. And he'd been gone for a long time, but he came into the plant today for some other kind of business, and he found me, and he asked me how you were doing. He wanted to know if you were okay. She goes, "What happened with you guys?" And I'm like, "I don't know." I'm not sure. So that, and then I heard the voice again. A few years later, I was actually giving a talk somewhere, I think in Dallas, and I was talking about some things that I had remembered. And then in the Q&A, these weird-looking guys stood up and said, "How did you know that?" I'm like, I was there. I know what I saw, and this is what I was told. And they both had suits on. They were both wearing sunglasses in the auditorium. They both got up and they left. And then I thought later on, I recognized that voice from somewhere. So, I mean, these are... And then one time somebody knocked on my door, and I opened the door in Indy. This is a different time when I wasn't as afraid to, There was a nice-looking young man at the door, dressed in a suit, and he says... He told me that he had talked to Bud, and Bud had given him my address, and he just had one question for me, and I knew right then that was a lie, because there ain't no way Bud would give anybody my address. But I thought, okay, I'm feeling safe. I said, "What's your question?" And it was a question about the phone calls that I had received when I was pregnant with my youngest son. I got a phone call every Wednesday at 9 a.m. for the whole 9 months, and it was weird. He wanted to know about those. So I told him about those, and he said, "Okay, thank you very much. Have a good day." And he left. So, yeah, I have had some weird human beings, not, as far as I know, not alien.
Now, one of the strangest aspects of the UFO abduction scenarios has to do with what has sometimes been called the hybrid breeding program. And you've had an experience that suggests that you yourself may have been involved in this supposed, what can we call it, a plan of these non-human entities to experiment with human genetics.
When I was 17, I was engaged to the man who would be my husband, my first husband, and the father of my 2 boys. And we weren't planning to get pregnant right away, and our wedding was supposed to be for June of 78. We weren't planning to get pregnant prior to getting married, and this was a different time, and it was not looked upon the same way that it was now, especially in my family. But I found out I was pregnant. I was still living with my parents at the time because I was 17, and I was going to move out when I got married. And if you know my dad, you knew that you did not tell your dad that you were pregnant. You did not tell this man you were pregnant and not married and living in his house unless you were 100% sure, because you do not want to deal with that. So I did go and have a pregnancy test at the doctor, and I had a physical exam. And I do recall the doctor having a conversation with me about my due date, potential due date, and he felt I maybe was a little farther along than I thought, because I thought, I know how you get pregnant, and I know what I did, and I knew it was at Christmas time. And he's convinced I'm at least a month more than that. But anyway, I was confirmed to be pregnant, and I accepted it. We told my dad. My mom already knew. We told my dad, told my fiance. Everything was going okay. I had a strange experience in the fall, in like November prior to this, with two girls, friends of mine, out in the country. We were driving around spying on her boyfriend at the time, because that's what she did. And I saw a light in the sky, and I made a comment. I remember saying, "Oh, look, there's a UFO," and I kind of laughed. And my friend driving, she's like, "Oh yeah, I see that. It's weird." And the girl behind in the back seat got all freaked out and got real scared and got down. "Don't say that," And I thought, "What's wrong with you?" And then things got fuzzy after that, and I did have a memory, like I thought it was a bad dream of being. We pulled over, the car was enveloped in black, like smoke, and someone was pulling me out of the car by my legs, and I didn't want to go. And I remember screaming, and I felt like I was at the doctor's, and, it was just it was a nightmare. So, but I didn't think about all that when I was finding out I was pregnant. And, I didn't even think about it when the doctor insisted I was farther along than what I knew I should be. We were supposed to get married that coming June, and we moved it up to April because I didn't want to be, big out there. Again, it was a different time. But sometime and that was in January, I believe. I believe it was in January when I found out I was pregnant. Late January, somewhere in there. It was early, but sometime in March, I was babysitting for my older sister. She had 4 little kids, bang, 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 stair step, and I was the free babysitter. And it was good practice now that I was going to have a kid of my own. And anyway, I was laying on the couch, and I had my face to the back of the couch, my back to the TV. And I can even remember the show I was watching. It was a Saturday night, I believe, either Friday or Saturday night. It was the Bob Newhart show, because I was listening to it, And all of a sudden, I felt this stroking sensation down my spine. And it startled me at first, but then I suddenly felt just real peaceful. And I thought, oh, it's just my little niece. She's going to curl up with me. And I drifted right off to sleep. And I woke up the next day, and I was in her bed, which is where I would have crashed out anyways. She was like 2, maybe 2 or 3 max. But I woke up in a panic. Immediately woke up in a panic, and I knew something was wrong with my baby. I'm like, oh, my baby, but something's wrong with my baby. My baby. And so I went to the bathroom. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake it. It was just eating on me all day. I felt anxious and weird, and it continued on and I told my friend that I'd been out there sneaking and spying on her boyfriend with in November, or October or November, was friends. Her brother was friends with my sister, my older sister, and I was in her neighborhood, and I was telling her, I'm like, I'm feeling weird about this. Something is wrong. And she's like, well, come with me to Planned Parenthood. I've got to go get my birth control pills. You can get a free pregnancy test. They won't ask any questions. I'm like, okay. So I went with her. She goes, they'll tell you you're pregnant. Then you'll calm down. Everything will be okay. Well, they didn't tell me I was pregnant. They told me I wasn't. And I freaked out. So I went home and told my mom there was a problem. I had a problem. I needed to see the doctor right away. So she got me in. And he did another pregnancy test, did blood work and pelvic exam. And then he told me and my mom, get dressed and come into my office. I went into the office. And he says to me, you are not pregnant. And I'm like, well, what the hell happened to my baby? You told me I was pregnant. I was having symptoms, getting bigger, everything else. And my mom, I remember my mom saying, did she have a miscarriage? Does she need a D&C? I remember my mom saying, does she need a D&C? Which is something they do to remove the, afterbirth or placenta or whatever that doesn't come out. Because I didn't have anything come out. And he said, no, she doesn't need any of that. Everything looked completely normal. And he looked at me and he said, we see this from time to time, especially in young women like you. And then he said, you are young. You're going to have plenty of other children. There's no reason you shouldn't be able to have plenty of kids. My advice to you is you forget this ever happened and just go on with your life. And I thought, okay, remember now, this was 1978, different time.
And you're still a teenager. And
I'm still I'm 7. I turned 18 in February. Okay, so I'm still a teenager. I just remember thinking, dude, I am never going to forget any of this. You are out of your mind. No. So, but when we left that day, we never talked about it again. I went ahead and got married to my fiance in April as we moved it up. And all that ended up, in 79, in July, I had my son. But we never spoke of it again. But it was always here. That never leaves you, And when you think when you are pregnant, and even when you didn't want to get pregnant, and then you finally accept it, and then you start, I was loving that baby. That was a loss to me. I grieved that. But I did it in silence, and I did it alone.
Well, you've had a series of events throughout your life which you describe as virtual reality. It's a dreamlike experience, an altered state of consciousness, but it feels, I gather, just as real to you, maybe even more real than your normal waking life.
I have 2 different kinds of dreams. I have regular dreams like everyone else, like where if I wake up, most of the time when I wake up, I don't even remember that I dreamed. Or I'll remember, I had a dream, but then, an hour later it's gone. But the other kind, they're different. These lucid dreams are different. I feel almost like I go somewhere else, when I'm asleep. But anyway, here's one that I was talking about the other day. It said, I had a strange dream, and it was pretty generic. I was in my house, in my town, just living life, doing regular daily stuff, but something was different. My house was mostly the same. Most of the decor was normal, but there were a few things that I didn't recognize. And I noticed the front door was a little different place. The windows were a little different shape. When I began to notice these small differences, I went outside and I looked at my house from the outside. The street number was the same, the bricks were the same, the landscaping was the same, the house footprint was the same. The street was my street, but a couple of the houses didn't look familiar. The house next door to mine was partially a different color. My car was in the garage. The house looked like mine, but with the differently configured doors and windows. I got in my car and I drove down to Myers. That's where I go shop at the grocery store. And it was there. I saw other people in other cars, people getting out of cars doing their daily business, but the car wash that usually is across the street was not there. There was some kind of little mini mart there in the place where the car wash was, and I didn't recognize it. I didn't recognize the name even of the store, but it was clearly a convenience store. I saw no other people that I knew during this dream. And as I sat in my car in the parking lot looking around, feeling weird, I remember my last thought before I woke up was, where the am I? And the instant that those words, because I said that out loud in the car, and the instant that those words left my mouth, I woke up and I was in my room. But I was somewhere else for a minute. It was just the weirdest thing. And it never I felt weird all day, like I had traveled a million miles, or, I was exhausted and I just felt weird all day. Those are the kind of strange little dreams that I have now. It's like I'm going somewhere else, or someone is talking to me. I was outside taking a walk, and I think I told you this when we were and I have a conversation. I was outside, this is a couple years ago, just going for a walk in the fall, enjoying the last of the good weather, had my headphones on, listening to my favorite sounds and tunes. And I heard a man's voice up from behind me, and he said, hey, Deb. And I took my headphones off and turned around fully expecting to see somebody behind me. And there wasn't anybody there. And I look all around the street. I'm thinking, I'm glad I live on a cul-de-sac and there ain't a lot of people out here, because I don't know what's happening. And then I said out loud, hello? Because maybe they were like hiding behind a bush or something. And he started right in. I can't see anybody. And I hear this man saying to me, do you know that where I'm from, I see you, but you're just a little ball of white light. You're bright, but that's all you look like. And he goes, I want you to know, when you see a little ball of white light in your darkness, that's me. He says, but where I live, I look just like you. And everybody else looks just like you. And I said, are you dead? I mean, you're trying to tell me you're a spirit? Am I hearing a dead person? And he laughed a little laugh, and he said, no, I'm just as alive as you are. And I thought, okay. Are you an alien? Are you one of those little gray guys? And he laughed a little bit again, and he said, no, they're your future. And I said, well, then who are you? And that was the end of the conversation. I could never get him to talk to me again or answer back what I'd asked. So I looked around and I thought, Jesus Christ, what just happened? I have lost my mind. I put my earbud back in and I looked around and hoped no one had seen me talking to the air. Made sure they could see I had my phone in my hand, so maybe they thought I was talking on the phone or something, I'm not prone to hear voices like that. I don't know why that happened or where that came. I was in a particularly zen state of mind, I will say. I was almost like in a meditative state. But that's the kind of stuff that happens now. The contact that I have, I'm still having some kind of contact with non-human or non-normal intelligence. But they're just not landing in my backyard and screwed up my eyes and stuff anymore. It's moved on to a different level.
Well, I'd like to go back to the baby that you had and then apparently lost mysteriously, because I understand that in your mind that child was to be named Emily, and in one of these virtual reality experiences you encountered Emily.
Yeah, it was a few years later. It was maybe 5 years later. I think she probably would have been about 5 years old at this point. I am again with those gray things with the big eyes. And I don't know where I'm at. I don't know how I got there. But I'm definitely not home or anywhere I recognize. And I'm sitting on sort of a table and the one dude, the one gray dude that I always seem to communicate with, actually the only one I communicate with, and recognize from other times in my life when I was younger, he seems to be anticipating something. I'm feeling this from him. And then these two smaller little gray creatures come in with this little kid between the two of them. They were like holding her hands. And they're all walking towards me. And as soon as I see her, I instantly feel this maternal, oh, that's mine. I want the, and in my mind, I'm jumping off the table and grabbing her and hugging her, Well, apparently she could read my mind somehow or knew what I was thinking. And it scared her because she instantly jumped behind these two and kind of pulled herself, in like she was protecting herself from me. And in that moment, it broke my heart. I'm like, oh, I would never hurt you. No, I love you, And it made me feel bad. And then I thought, well, if that's all you're used to, and then you see this, okay, I get it. Because I'm probably pretty scary looking to a little kid who's never seen anything else but these little smooth gray dudes. So then I got mad at him and I said, that's mine. I want her. You took her from me. That's not fair. And I said, can I take her home with me? And he's like, no, you can't, because she would not survive with you. You would not be able to feed her. And I can't remember how the rest of it went. I think there were promises that I would see her again someday. I'm pretty sure that's how they do. But, and there was another time after that I wanted to sleep. This is weird. It was years later, several years later, I was in my apartment. I was sitting at the kitchen table, smoking a cigarette, drinking a cup of coffee, because I used to smoke back then. I had a patio door open, and the patio had one of those little privacy fences, right? With the little slats that you could see through, kind of, because they were cheap. Cheap. It was cheap housing. But, you could see through the slats a little bit. And I felt somebody looking at me all of a sudden, and I looked up. And there's a kid, maybe 7, 8, 9 years old, size, tall, wise. I mean, I could only see a little sliver of her, right? Big blue eye, white hair, like we used to call them towheads. All my nieces and nephews had that all white hair and got dark when they got older. So the blonde-haired kid with the big blue eye, and one big blue eye looking at me through the slat in this fence. But then I realized the rest of this kid is all black. I mean, this child is like got on black shirts, black pants, even black shoes. And I saw the face and I'm like, what you looking at, girl? Like that, I thought in my head. And then I'm like, wait a minute, what am I seeing here? And then it hit me, because that's how I remember them dressed. And I jumped up and I ran through the patio door. And as I did, she took off running. And I went through the back. I flung that privacy fence door gate open, and I ran behind my apartment. It's like alley between buildings. There was no one there. I ran down to the end, and I'm looking this way and that way. I go down to the next row of buildings and look. This kid is nowhere to be seen. So after I'm run all over the apartment complex for 10, 15 minutes, and I can't find anybody that even remotely looks like what I just saw. And I go back into my apartment and I sit down and I think, that was her. She came back here and peeked at me. I just knew it. I can't prove it. And this wasn't a dream. I was wide awake, but I just knew in my heart that was her. Now she would be 47 or 48 years old in human age, I guess, by now. My oldest son is 45. So she would be 47 maybe. And I find myself looking, when I go to the store, if I see somebody with really white hair and really pretty blue eyes, I will double look at them and think, is that her? I mean, I can't help myself. I don't know why. I guess it's the mother in me. But I feel like somehow, somewhere, sometime, she hasn't forgotten me. Children don't forget their mother. Even when kids are adopted, what do? They seek out their birth mothers. That child that I had inside of me is somewhere. I don't know where, but I know she remembers me.
You described a few minutes ago in this virtual reality dreamlike experience that you had, the Greys, and they seem very familiar to you at that point. You even mentioned there's one who you always talk to. So I gather that at this point you're comfortable with the idea that you've had ongoing communications with them.
it's a big part of my life in many ways. I mean, it's part of what molded me to what I am. It's not like he really ever told me a whole lot of stuff. I've actually had more things just come into my mind randomly that I write down than to actually sit down and have a conversation back and forth with this thing. The whatever conversations I had were remedial, you know. But I can't help but feel that the information that I get now comes from the same source that he comes from. I don't know if he's just a worker or whatever, but you know, the things that I remember. I just read something the other day about how they're using sound waves now to break up. They used to break up kidney stones, and now they're beginning to realize they can do it. They can break up liver tumors with the sound waves and all that. And I can't tell you how many times I've been pummeled with these ideas and thoughts in my head that sound is important, and sound can heal, and sound can be a nutrient. It can feed, it can heal, it can do all kinds of stuff. It can move mountains with sound, you know what I mean? And they are the ones who told me that, but I'm not sure how they told me, how that information got into my head from there. I told you for like 2 years or so, year and a half after the June 30, 83 incident, I would be overwhelmed with these images and thoughts that would just pop into my head or wake me up in the middle of the night from a sound sleep. And the only way I could carry on or go back to sleep or focus on what I was trying to do would be to write it down or draw the image. So I started carrying a notebook around. And that's where like some of my book comes from. It's just the notes that I kept. That let up greatly for a long time after that, but now it seems as if it comes in waves now and cycles where that'll happen again. You know what I mean? Like that one, I just had that strange lucid dream about a black hole that leaks energy from a different universe. You know, who dreams about stuff like that? I got a high school diploma and a beauty school certificate, for God's sake. I'm not a scientist, or I don't even know what some of those words mean, you know, but I have these dreams.
Well, to be clear, you are also a member of Mensa. The fact that you haven't had a lot of education doesn't mean that you are of low intelligence. Just the opposite is true.
That is true, but, you know, even that in and of itself is a bit of a mystery. I mean, I've got my high school transcripts that show my IQ was 111 at testing in high school, which is nothing to be embarrassed of. I mean, you know, it's all good. But how it went from that to, I think I scored like 141 on the Kauble or something. I've got my invitation letter from Mensa. I would have never dreamed of even trying that. My late husband is the one who instigated all that. He kept saying, "You are smarter than you think." I'm like, "No, I ain't." He goes, "Yes, you are." So he's the one that talked me into taking the testing. And, you know, like I said, if I hadn't met Bud, I wouldn't have met him. You know, it's all connected.
Do you feel like the interactions that you're having with this gray, non-human being that communicates with you in this virtual reality state is continuing at this point in your life?
Yes. I watch all the things that go on in the world here today, and I'm a human being, and I'm weak. I have weaknesses, and I get angry, and I mean, I'm not dumb, so I understand how things work and how things don't work. And I also, somebody has taught me somewhere along the line that not just me, everyone, all of us, our thoughts are powerful. And we must be mindful of our thoughts and the way that we think, because our thoughts our intentions create everything around us. Everything in the room that you're sitting in right now began as a thought in somebody's mind, an idea, okay? You know? And a thought is like a pebble on a quiet pond. You know, when you drop that thought into that quiet pond, and it will reverberate eternally until something stops it. And I've also watched videos where people have played, you know, beautiful music with sand on a table, and the beautiful music makes beautiful patterns, but the crazy sounds and the negative energy words and everything make scattered crazy patterns. Our thoughts do the same thing in the world that we're living in. And I keep feeling like part of my job, if you will, is to help people recognize that and to remember that and remember how powerful they are. And if they have a particular vision of a world they want to be in, all they have to do is think of it that way, and it will follow. I told you, I think I mentioned to you, and like I see on TV, they make these shows about 7 ways the world will end, and axe murder, the Vasilla axe murder house, and you know all the scary shows and everything. I'm like, don't watch that. Don't do that. You don't need that. No. That's how things have got so messed up. I don't know. I know I'm sounding like a crazy person, but I really feel that. Somebody has told me that we're very powerful creatures, more than we realize, and we better realize how powerful we are before we do too much damage that it can't be fixed. You know what I mean? I don't know. I know it sounds good. That's a far stretch from June 30, 1983, and getting hit in the chest and thinking you're going to die and having a nervous breakdown, to feeling and having thoughts like that blow out of your head, you know?
Well, Debra Jordan Kauble, what an adventure you have been on. I'm so glad that you have reached out and shared it with me and shared it with the New Thinking Aloud community, because I don't think anybody can watch your conversation and not understand that you are a very authentic human being, speaking from the heart, talking about things that you have actually lived through and have been validated by other witnesses. It makes your case extremely valuable, I think, to our audience. So I'm delighted to be with you today, and I hope we have future opportunities as well.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for allowing me the time to tell my story and for getting to know you. I'm just happy to get to know you.
Well, thank you so much. And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here.
Book 3 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.